The voice to Parliament, as we have been discussing this morning, is facing more hurdles as the referendum draws closer, most recently from inside its own working group. Advisors have been unable to agree on the terminology that should be used in the voice, and legal experts are continuing to sound the alarm over the extensive powers which are being proposed. Country Liberal Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price has been a strong advocate against the voice, and she joins us now. Jacinta, thank you so much for your time. The more we learn about the voice, the detail, the more concerns are raised, and those concerns don't seem to be satisfied by the Albanese government.
Oh, look, as there should be concerns, because I mean, you know, Dutton's holding strong on the idea that there needs to be far more detail than there is. You know, Labor have gone back and forth, and the Prime Minister said, well, we're not going to have any detail. We're going to leave that as a determination of Parliament to create the detail on what the voice might be. And now we're seeing within the working group itself that they don't know too sure. They're not too sure on how it should all be constructed. It's completely and utterly muddy, and this is a proposal that they want us to sign off on to actually put an amendment in our founding document, in our constitution, and yet it's like scrambled eggs. It's all over the place. The working group doesn't know what it's doing, and quite frankly, I think it's deeply concerning, and I think Australians need to understand, if they haven't yet, that this is absolutely heading for disaster, and we need to ensure that our country doesn't go in this direction.
Senator, I was struck by a couple of things this week here. Yesterday, Anthony Albanese went to the inner west of Sydney, and he gave a very almost shrill, I think, address to a crowd of, you would imagine, mostly yes voters in the inner west of Sydney. At the same time, though, a couple of days prior, Julian Leeser, who we've always suspected was one of the more sort of pro-voice voices within the Liberal Party room, came out and said essentially that as it's going now, he doesn't think the thing can get up. Do you take any interpretation from this, A, that the Liberals are going to join you guys in the Nationals in saying no to this, and also that the Albanese government is really starting to get quite nervous about the prospect of this signature thing that he promised the night he won the election?
Yeah, look, I think I have faith that the Liberal Party, you know, are a common sense party, that they will, you know, they're wanting to know all the detail, or lack of detail, or coming to understand that this doesn't really seem to have legs. And I'm very hopeful that they will be able to say, well, you know what, we've tried, and you haven't been able to present us with anything of any decency. You know, in terms of Sydney's inner west, I think Albanese has to recognise that there are a lot of migrant communities also, and I've actually had a bit to do with some of those communities, and they have raised grave concerns with me over the fact that you know, this is all about, this sort of argy-bargy is predominantly about white Australia and black Australia. What about everyone else? What about the migrant community of Australia? Why aren't we as important as, you know, as black or white Australia, or certainly as the first Australians? And I think you'll find that a lot of the migrant community aren't prepared to support this proposition, because it isn't recognising us as equal, regardless of whether we were here as part of the First Peoples, whether we came, you know, as far as part of the fleets, or whether we came, you know, later on, even over the last few years, and not only that, but we can't forget that migrants have also been smashed on Australia Day in terms of that debate, because that is the most popular day to have a citizenship ceremony, to be sworn in. So there are a lot of migrants in this country who have become citizens on Australia Day, and suddenly their day has been ripped by them as well. I mean, this is quietly chipping away in the background, and Albanese is absolutely blind to it. And to think that he can go out to, you know, Western Sydney and carry on like he did, like a bit of a galah, I don't think he's reading the room, to be quite honest.
You are so right on that migrant issue. This is something I've been talking about for some time, because for many migrants, It is actually offensive. This entire narrative is basically a PC way of saying go back to where you came from. When you say always was, always will be, you're basically telling migrants who've chosen to be here that you're not as entitled to call this country yours as someone else based purely on their ancestry. It is a really divisive message to be sending to migrants who we want to be part of the country and to feel that this country is as much theirs as anybody else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Labor to suggest that this is about unifying this country and this is going to bring about unity like a magic wand is nonsense, because it's actually the whole debate, everything about it is so toxic and divisive. It's actually created that divisiveness already. And it can only push it further if this referendum.
We're having some sound issues. James, your question for Senator Price?
Yes, Senator, I wanted to ask you, there's reports from Alice Springs that domestic violence and assaults are up about 60% in the last 12 months. My question for you is, if there was a voice, you were a councillor in Alice Springs, you were Deputy Mayor, if there was a voice to Parliament, would that make a difference on the ground in Alice Springs?
Absolutely not. It would not make a difference because what it comes down to is whether those in power are prepared to actually listen, as we know. And as we've seen, the Minister for Indigenous Australians received a letter backdated June 9 about the grave concerns about the lifting of the Stronger Futures legislation and the alcohol restrictions. Locals on the ground were telling this government, I've been telling this government, and basically they chose to ignore all of those voices that were already there. So it's about this government actually growing a pair of ears, not about claiming that if a voice was there already in existence, somehow this would never have come about. That is insulting. That is insulting to the people on the ground who've been screaming out and attempting to use their voice for a very long time and not being listened to, basically because it's not politically correct, it doesn't follow an ideology, or they aren't supporters of Labor, so they're basically neglected. That is a deep insult. And in fact, in Senate estimates this week, those.
Oh, we've lost Senator Price there, one of the most, if not the most courageous woman in this country. Yeah. We love her, support her.